If you want to help Myth Vision Podcast grow, you can join our Patreon. There are different tiers, as well as help out with PayPal. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Question from David Bacati, and I believe this is following up in one thread. I couldn't get all the picture in one, and I think it comes down to me, so let me ask this question to myself from David here. Okay, he says, I may not have the whole thing here in context. Seriously blaming you and discrediting your presentation of their view, which is also total BS, and pisses me off a bit. I think he's talking about Israel only. Yeah, he is. So are they pushing you to present their views to scholars, or is IO something that you think has some potential? I tend to think they are scared to write a book because deep down they know scholars won't give it the time of day and they can't handle the criticism. Anyways, I would like your take before I engage with these guys anymore. Before I get to your final question to Dr. Price, you can engage them. Personally, I'm going to let you know right now, you're not going to convince them. Okay, I don't know if there's a way you'll be able to convince them with the methodology they use to come to their own conclusions on their own ideas. They have presuppositions of particular things that no one is guilty of sin except for those who are given the law, and those who were given the law were Israel. Therefore, why did Jesus come to save people from the law other than Israelites? And they have a genetic position here where you had to be a biological seed, all that kind of stuff. So this is my own inquiry because I see certain things that make sense, but also things that don't. And so I really want to put the flame to it. Any position that I present, I want to test. If it stands the flames and it endures, well, obviously, then you know that there might be some potential there. It hasn't been scrutinized on that level, and I want it to be critically assessed before throwing away the whole theory. At the same time, there are some things that I'd like to say real quick is, if I'm a recovering addict, I mentioned this to Dr. Price, if someone's hurting from drug addiction, it affects me in a personal way, and I want to try and help them in some sense because I've been there. Israel-only proponents come from a school of full preterism, which is an eschatological position that the end literally happened and that all Bible prophecy was fulfilled. I came from the same thread, where these guys went IO and at first still were complete historical believers and didn't take a mythological approach to the Bible. I went down the myth path and went critical scholarship path. And I am testing this theory in light of scholarship, hoping, based on all the evidence I do have of their writings, wishing there was a book because it's hard to assess something. At the end of the day, there might be some way of them saying, oh, well, straw man, you straw man here, you straw man there. Hard to say what's going to come of it, but I did the best I can on gathering information to try and present the view with the evidence of their view I have. And this is a lot from major proponents of the view that'll be given to Dr. Carrier, who's going to be presenting his view of the view after he critically analyzes it. So you're going to want to stay tuned to that. And I am going to be talking to other scholars who talk about stuff that comes close to it, but they do not line up or agree with their position. So thank you for the question. Hope that answers it. Now to your last question on 1 Corinthians 11. Make sure I got this lined up here. All right. Dr. Price, it's about 1 Corinthians 11 and the Lord's Supper. I tend to think the early churches were most likely very Jewish, but I have a lot of trouble believing Paul could ever convince a Jewish convert to start drinking blood and eating a dead body, whether it is in literal sense or even just symbolic. The ritual seems appalling coming from a Jewish point of view. What does he think about the origins of the ritual? Was the Corinthian church purely pagan and more open to this? Was the meal viewed in a different sense in the early churches than the communion meal described later in Catholicism? Does he think this portion of 1 Corinthians 11 was added in later and not part of Paul's original letter? Any other info on the evolution of the Lord's Supper would be great. If this has already been discussed, please point me to that video. Thanks, Derek.
Well, some do say that that section is interpolated, that it sounds like an interruption of what would flow more smoothly without it. Could be the only thing that would really say one way or the other is if you found a very early manuscript that didn't have it. because there are none such known yet, most scholars would say, well, we can just go ahead and assume that it is all by Paul until you can prove it guilty, it's innocent. That's no way to proceed, but of course you can't play the game they want to play if you do that. And some admit that boy, that would really play hell with our attempts to reconstruct the theology of Paul and all that. So what, are you going to pretend it's not so? I mean, well, let's assume, however, that it is. It's one of those things that it is genuinely Pauline, whoever the writer actually was. I don't see any way around saying that this comes from an agriculturally based mystery religion, like all the mystery religions where you learned the secrets and went through the degrees of initiation to gain salvation, etc. They were outgrowths of agricultural religions where you weren't trying for any inner transformation of yourself, but you were trying to facilitate the renewal of nature, essentially a sort of magical thing. And nature was symbolized by a god of nature, the most prominent examples being Dionysus and Osiris, whom the Greeks thought must have been the same guy. Well, it made sense because they were the gods of produce, and both had sacramental meals in which one ate bread as the body of the god, because if the god is grain, the bread is his body. And they also drank wine and or beer, because the wine is the blood of the grape, and the beer of the grain. And that makes perfect sense in that context. It makes no sense whatever in a Jewish or Christian context. And so to me, you just can't get away from that, though people like to try to evade it. Where did it come from? Was it tradition that Paul received from those who were apostles before him, which he does say in 1 Corinthians 15 about the resurrection appearances? But here he says he received it from the Lord. Now you can say, as the great Joachim Jeremias said, that, well, he means that the Lord was the ultimate source of this because he's the one that said it on the night on which he was handed over. But even that, once you shake off being so familiar with this from hearing it so many times, seems contrived. It sounds a lot more like the beginning of Galatians, where he says explicitly, my gospel is not from man. It didn't come to me from man. I got it directly from the Lord. Well, that it sounds more like that. Now, people find that implausible because they say, wait a minute, this is a narrative. How could he have gotten this by revelation from Christ? Well, it's not as much of a narrative as you think. People tend to read the Gospels into this. It doesn't say it's a Passover. It doesn't even say he said it to disciples. I mean, it sort of sounds like it's a revelation of a cultic act from the God. That's, I mean, just look at what is not said in it. And so it really isn't a narrative. It does say on the night on which he was handed over. Yeah, but that doesn't imply the betrayal of Judas. In Romans, it says that God handed him over, the same Greek word, paradidomi. And it was only because somebody took it as meaning in this text, betrayed, that they came up with a betrayer to do the job. Judas Iscariot, which one of the options for its meaning is Judas the false one, the betrayer. So it's not necessarily much of a narrative, and it does sort of sound like the writer is saying this is a revelation from Christ. Was there an alternative understanding of this? Well, yeah. Albert Schweitzer and others suggested that it's a compositive narrative, as so much else is in the Gospels, and that originally the story just had Jesus saying, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until that day I drink it anew with you in the kingdom of God, which was a vow of abstinence, possibly indicating how quick the parousia, or the apocalypse, or whatever you want to call it, was supposed to happen. It won't necessarily be long before he drinks it with them again. So that it wasn't a sacramental meal, it was just a vow of abstinence, kind of equivalent to a Nazarite vow for a stated time. Also in the Didache, the teaching, meaning the whole name is the teaching of the 12 apostles to the nations, where it says that it gives you the liturgy that must have been used in the Syrian churches for whom this was written. It's a church order. If apostles, wandering missionaries, come to your congregation, here's how you should treat them, and one thing and another. And it says, as for the Eucharist, which just means thanksgiving, by the way, it says that you should say that you thank God for this bread, and just as it is taken from many hillsides and made one loaf, so are we who partake of it, one body. And the same thing with the wine. And it says, it refers to your servant David at first, that the vine of the wine is that of your servant David. And the bread, I guess, of your servant Jesus. And this is either very primitive, pre-Eucharistic in the usual sense, or a later alteration of it, but the logic of it usually is, if something sticks out like a sore thumb from the later universal tradition, it seems to be like a loose end, that it seems to be a fossil of an earlier view. And we do hear from different early church writers that some Christians observed the Lord's Supper with bread and fish, or bread and water. So who knows? And that might be attested, in the stories of the multiplication of loaves and fish. I mean, many scholars think that it's about the Eucharist anyway, that the symbolism is, yes, it's just bread, but isn't it really more than that, because it contains a blessing from God. So the multiplication is of the significance of it. That seems very likely to me, and it would fit even better if it came from a Sitz im Leben, a setting in life of a church that observed the Eucharist with bread and fish. So there are certainly reasons to believe that the Lord's Supper had been observed in different ways in different places. That shouldn't be any big shocker. I mean, we think of the diversity of theories that Christians have today as to what it means. There's an amazing variety of them. Think of the Christians like the Quakers, the Salvation Army, and the Kimbanguist Church in Congo, where there is no Lord's Supper or baptism, and for theological reasons. And so there's, or when you can have it, how often must you have it, and what is going on in it, and is the real presence there, and so on. Well, it's no surprise that that the ancient Christians from the beginning had different views of it. So
makes me want to ask more questions.